The day my daughter-in-law told me the grand opening of my son's law office was by invitation only for clients and professional contacts, I was standing in my kitchen in the same flannel shirt I'd worn to paint her living room 2 summers ago. I didn't say anything right away. I just nodded like I understood and told her I'd talk to her later. Then I set the phone down on the counter and stood there looking out the window at the yard I'd been meaning to reseed for 3 years. The grass had these dead patches in it, brown and stubborn. I stared at those patches for a long time. That was a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The opening had been the previous Saturday. 4 days. She waited 4 days to mention it, and only because I called asking when I should plan to drive up. Let me back up a little, because this story doesn't start with a phone call. It starts the way most things in my life have started, with me deciding that what mattered most was making sure the people I loved didn't struggle the way I did. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 31 years working for a commercial electrical contracting company outside of Columbus, Ohio. Started as an apprentice at 19, worked my way up to foreman, and by the time my knees started giving me real trouble, I was supervising crews on projects that cost more than most people's neighborhoods. I was good at it. I never made a fortune, but I was steady, and steady was something I understood. My wife passed when our son was 14, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I won't spend much time there because even now, 15 years later, some doors I just don't open all the way. What I will say is that after she was gone, my son became the project I poured everything into. Not in a smothering way. I wasn't that kind of father. But I made sure he had what he needed. And I made sure he had what he needed. And I made sure he knew he was not alone. He was a good kid. Smart in a way that always surprised me a little, the way you can be surprised by something you partly recognize. He got into Ohio State on his own merits, and when he said he wanted to go to law school, I told him that was fine by me as long as he was serious about it. He was. He got into a solid program in Chicago. I helped with what the loans didn't cover. Around $14,000 over 3 years. Not a number I threw around, but not one I've forgotten either. He graduated. Passed the bar on his first attempt. Moved back closer to home, which made me happy. Got a job at a mid-sized firm in Columbus doing corporate work, which I didn't entirely understand but was proud of anyway. Then he met her. My daughter-in-law came from a different world. Her father was a dentist. Her mother ran some kind of interior design consultancy. They lived in a nice suburb of Cleveland, drove new cars every 3 years, and the first time I had dinner at their house, I accidentally used the wrong fork, and her mother corrected me with a smile that wasn't really a smile. I didn't say anything. I wasn't there for me. My son married her 2 years after they met. I threw him a rehearsal dinner at a steakhouse in downtown Columbus that cost me close to $4,000. I wrote a check for another $5,000 as a wedding gift. I was happy to do it. She seemed to make him happy, and that was the metric I was using at the time. Things shifted gradually. Not all at once. It never is it? It's more like water getting into concrete. You don't see it happening, and then one winter the whole thing cracks. The first thing I noticed was how rarely he called on his own. I'd go 2, sometimes 3 weeks without hearing from him. And when I called, the conversations felt managed. Short, like he was aware of someone else in the room, even when I could tell he was alone. Then there was the matter of the house. About 1.5 years after they were married, they bought a house in a suburb north of Columbus. Nice place. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, the kind of neighborhood where people power wash their driveways. I didn't ask what they paid, but I knew what houses in that area went for, and I knew what a first-year associate and a woman who worked in marketing made combined. The math didn't add up easily. My daughter-in-law's parents helped, I assumed. I didn't ask. It wasn't my business. But then my son called me one Sunday evening, and I could tell right away from his voice that he was building up to something. He talked about the weather for a while, asked about my neighbor's dog, circled around whatever it was for almost 10 minutes before he finally said that they were having some trouble with the down payment. His in-laws had contributed what they could. He was wondering if I might be able to help close the gap. The gap was $22,000. I had been putting money into a savings account since he was born. His mother and I started it when he came home from the hospital. It had taken a lot of years and a lot of discipline to build it to what it was. I wired him $22,000 the following Monday morning. He thanked me. She sent a text that said, "Thank you so much, means the world." That was the last I heard about it. About 8 months after they moved in, my son mentioned over the phone that he was thinking about leaving the firm. He wanted to open his own practice. Smaller, specialized, focused on small business contracts and employment disputes. He had a vision for it. I could hear the excitement in his voice, the same way I used to hear it when he'd explain some project he was working on in school. I asked him what he needed to get started. He said a space, equipment, filing systems, a website, malpractice insurance, 3 to 6 months of operating expenses as a cushion. He'd been working the numbers. He figured he needed somewhere around $60,000 to do it right. I had a little over 80 in that savings account by then, the account his mother and I had started for him. I told him I could do 40. He said that would change everything. Over the next 7 months, I transferred the money in 4 installments. I never asked for documentation, never asked to see a business plan. He was my son. I trusted him. During those 7 months, I drove up to Columbus 4 times to help with the build-out of the office space. I painted 2 rooms. I helped hang shelving. I assembled the waiting area furniture, one of those flat-pack jobs with 47 steps that took an entire Saturday afternoon. My daughter-in-law came by once during those visits, stayed for about 20 minutes, said the color I'd chosen for the accent wall was a little much, and left. I didn't say anything about that either. The office opened on a Saturday in late September. I know this because I found out 4 days later. When she told me on the phone, matter-of-factly, like she was telling me what they'd had for dinner, she said it had been a private event, professional contacts, clients they were trying to retain. She said it really wasn't the kind of thing that would have been comfortable for everyone. I asked her what that meant. She paused just long enough to let me know she'd thought about her answer. Then she said, "It was a networking event, really. Attorneys, business owners, people in that circle. It just made more sense to keep it focused." I said I understood and I'd talk to her later. I set the phone down and looked at those dead patches in the grass. That evening I drove past the office. I know how that sounds. I'm a 62-year-old man who drove past his son's law office like a teenager checking on a date. But I needed to see it. I needed to see the sign on the door, the light through the windows, the space I had helped build with my own hands, the shelves I had leveled, the walls I had painted, the furniture I had assembled piece by piece on a Saturday when my knees were telling me to stop. The lights were still on inside. I could see framed diplomas on the wall through the front window. I sat in my truck in the parking lot across the street for about 10 minutes. Then I drove home. The next morning, I called my banker. I've done business at the same credit union in Columbus for 28 years. The woman I spoke with had processed enough transactions for me over the years that she knew my voice when I picked up. I told her I needed to put a hold on an upcoming scheduled transfer. I had planned one final installment, the last 12,000 of the 40 I promised. She processed the hold without comment. Then I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but I'm not going to apologize for either. I spent the next 2 weekends doing what I should have done months earlier. I paid attention. I drove past their house a few times. I noticed the new car in the driveway. A lease, I eventually confirmed, on a vehicle that ran close to $60,000. I asked around carefully. I knew a guy who did business insurance in that area and found out the office rent was higher than what my son had told me. The space he described as modest was in one of the pricier professional buildings in that part of Columbus. I also called my son directly one afternoon and asked him, casually, how the first few weeks of business were going. He said great, said they already had 3 retainer clients. I said that was wonderful and asked if he'd had any cash flow concerns, any early unexpected costs. He said no. Everything was smooth. I said that was good to hear. 6 weeks after the grand opening I had not attended. My phone rang at 7:40 on a Tuesday morning. It was my daughter-in-law. She almost never called me directly. Her voice was tight. She said the bank had flagged an overdraft on the business account. She said a payment they'd been counting on hadn't come through. She said, was there any chance I had scheduled a transfer recently that might be pending, because she knew my son had mentioned I might be sending something soon. I told her I had put a hold on it. There was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds. In my experience, 4 seconds is a very long time for a silence on a phone call. She said, I'm sorry. I said, I put a hold on the transfer. I've been thinking about whether now is the right time for it. She said, Walter. I said, my name isn't Walter. Another silence. I told her that I wished her and my son well, that I hoped the practice was going to work out, and that I'd be in touch with my son directly. Then I ended the call. My son called 40 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 6 minutes long. He started formal and ended something else, quieter, younger sounding. At the end he said, Dad, I don't know what happened. I don't know what she said to you, but I need to talk to you. Not about the money. Just, I need to talk to you. Not about the money. Just, I need to talk to you. I sat with that message for 2 days. I called him back on a Thursday evening. He answered on the first ring. We talked for almost 2 hours. The longest conversation we'd had in 3 years, probably. He asked me straight out why I'd stopped the transfer. I told him straight out what I knew. The car, the rent, the opening I wasn't invited to, and what his wife had said to me about who fit in at a professional event. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, I didn't know she said that to you. I told him I believed him. He said he was sorry. Not in the way people say sorry when they want something. In the slower, deliberate way that means they've been sitting with something and finally found the words. He said he'd let himself get turned around. He said his wife had strong opinions about image and perception, and he'd been trying to keep everyone happy, which meant he'd been keeping me in a particular lane without ever really deciding to do that. I told him I understood how that happened. I also told him I wasn't going to pretend it didn't hurt. We talked about his mother a little, first time in a while. He cried some. I let him. I told him the money was still his, that I hadn't cancelled it, only paused it, and that I'd release it once I felt like we were back on honest ground. Not as punishment, just because I needed to know that the relationship we had was something real and not just a withdrawal system. He said that was fair. I sent the transfer 3 weeks later. I won't tell you my daughter-in-law and I became close after that. We didn't. She's polite to me now, in the way that people are polite when they know they've been caught being impolite. She sends birthday cards. She makes sure I have a chair at the table when I come up for holidays. It's civil, and at 62 I've learned that civil is sometimes the best you're going to get. What changed was my son. He calls me on his own now. Not because he needs something, just to talk. He told me a few months ago that opening that practice was the hardest and best thing he'd ever done, and that he wished his dad could have been at the opening. I told him I'd been there. I'd seen the sign on the door, and the diplomas on the wall, and the shelves I'd put up, with a level and a drill on a Saturday when my knees were screaming at me. He said, I know, Dad. I know you were there. I think about my wife sometimes when I'm looking at those dead patches in the yard. She would have had something sharp and right to say about all of it. She always did. I like to think she would have said I handled it okay. Not perfectly, but okay. That I held the line without burning the whole thing down. The grass, by the way, came back in the spring. Took some patience and the right kind of seed, but it filled in. Looks decent now. I keep meaning to tell somebody that. Sometimes the dead patches surprise you. I've been thinking about that 6-minute voicemail my son left me. The way his voice changed somewhere around minute 4, lost the formality, got quieter, younger. That shift didn't happen because the money stopped. It happened because somewhere in the process of building a life that looked impressive from the outside, he'd lost track of what actually held him together. The money stopping just made the noise quiet enough for him to hear it. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody likes to sit with. It doesn't care about your intentions. It only responds to your actions, steadily, over time, the way interest compounds, in either direction. My daughter-in-law spent 2 years making small calculations about who was worth including in their world, and each one of those calculations had a cost she wasn't tracking. My son spent 2 years letting it happen because keeping the peace felt easier than choosing a side. Those weren't neutral choices. They were deposits into an account that eventually came due. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I lived on the other side of it, and I know what it cost me to stay steady when everything in me wanted to react. Staying steady, that's the part I had to work at, not the withholding of the transfer. That was actually the easy part once I'd made up my mind. The harder part was sitting with the hurt without letting it make me reckless, driving past that office, sitting in my truck in a parking lot at 62 years old, looking at shelves I'd hung with a level and a drill. That was not my finest moment in terms of dignity, but it was honest. I needed to see the thing I'd helped build and feel the full weight of having been excluded from it. I needed to not look away from that. That's what I'd call doing the right thing in the right order. First you feel it clearly, then you think it through, then you act. My wife used to say I was too slow to anger and too slow to forgive, and she wasn't wrong about either. But slow isn't the same as weak. Sometimes slow is just the patience it takes to make sure you're responding to what's actually happening, rather than what you're afraid is happening. My son has that same quality in him, I think, buried under a few years of trying to be whoever his wife needed him to be. It came back when it had room to. When I stopped filling every gap, he had to stand in them himself, and it turned out he could. That's not something I could have given him by staying comfortable. The grass in my yard really did come back. I'm not trying to make it a metaphor, but I also can't pretend it doesn't mean something to me. I put the right seed down, gave it water, stopped walking on it for a while, and it filled in. Some things just need the right conditions and enough time. I'm glad I didn't pave over the whole yard just because a few patches looked dead.